Welcome to The Explainer. So, I want you to start by thinking back to a time in your own life when things just felt completely uncertain. A time when you honestly did not know what tomorrow would bring, when the road ahead looked entirely dark, and you kind of just weren't sure you had the strength to keep going. We all know that feeling, right? It visits literally every single one of us at some point, and man, it carries a really heavy emotional weight.
So, what happens when you truly don't know what tomorrow brings? Imagine feeling that profound, terrifying uncertainty not just for an afternoon or a stressful week, but for years. Imagine carrying the actual weight of an entire new nation on your shoulders, standing out in the freezing snow with no shoes, barely any food, and absolute desperation all around you. Now, this isn't some exaggerated script from a Hollywood movie. This is the true story of a real, highly vulnerable human being, a guy who felt fear, who made some massive mistakes, who lost devastating battles, and who came remarkably close to just giving up the whole shebang entirely, but he didn't. And because he kept showing up, a country was born. We are talking, of course, about George Washington.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the man behind the myth.
Today, we're going to completely strip away that stiff, flawless textbook image you might be used to. We want to look at the real George Washington. He was born in 1732 in Virginia, and contrary to what some might think, he wasn't born into massive wealth. And right away, in 1743, tragedy strikes. Washington was only 11 years old when his father died. That single loss changed the entire trajectory of his life. You see, because he wasn't the oldest son, his older half-brothers inherited practically all the land and money. So without his father's wealth, George didn't get to go off to some fancy formal school in England like other boys of his status. He had to grow up incredibly fast. He learned at home and actually taught himself the absolutely crucial skill of land surveying, just to make his own way in the world.
Which brings us to Section 2, early lessons in failure. Now, you might be thinking his military career started with immediate, heroic glory. Well, spoiler alert, it absolutely did not. By 1753, at just 21 years old, Washington was sent out into the freezing, dangerous Ohio Valley on his very first military mission to tell French soldiers to leave the land. It was brutal. He almost drowned in a frozen river and nearly froze to death in the snow. Then, the following year, in 1754, Washington led soldiers into battle against the French, and it was a total disaster. His small group was completely surrounded by a much larger French force, and, well, he had to surrender. It was his very first real taste of combat, and it ended in total defeat. But as they say, failure is not the end of the story. It is often where the real story begins. What makes Washington stand out is that he didn't run away from that humiliating failure. He studied it. He analyzed exactly what went wrong. He showed immense early resilience. After this, he actually returned to a much quieter life in Virginia. He carefully managed his farm at Mount Vernon, married a widow named Martha, and raised her 2 children as his own. Over time, he built this solid reputation as a calm, patient, and just incredibly hardworking man. All right, moving on to Section 3, surviving the impossible war.
So by 1775, the American colonies were at an absolute breaking point with the King of England over these heavy, unfair taxes. They desperately needed a leader for their newly forming army, and they chose Washington. But here's the thing. He accepted this massive role super reluctantly, with quiet seriousness. He openly admitted to the other leaders his own severe doubts. He straight up told them he wasn't certain he was truly ready for the responsibility. And honestly, looking at what he was walking into, you can't blame him. On one side, you have his Continental Army, basically farmers and tradesmen, practically no weapons, completely unfunded, starving, and entirely untrained. And on the other, the British Army, one of the most powerful, wealthy, and highly trained military forces on the entire planet. The situation looked completely, undeniably impossible. So the crucial point here is understanding the sheer length of this struggle. The Revolutionary War lasted 8 grueling, brutal years. Think about that for a second. 8 years. During this time, Washington actually lost a lot of battles. He retreated far more often than he attacked. His strategy wasn't about aggressive, constant attacking to destroy the British. It was a strategy of sheer patience. He realized he just needed to keep his ragtag army alive long enough for England to simply grow tired of fighting. But keeping them alive meant enduring the absolute abyss of Valley Forge.
The winter of 1777 to 1778 was horrific. Temperatures plummeted way below freezing. Men lacked proper coats, and many literally had no shoes. They were wrapping their bleeding feet in rags as they walked through the snow. Thousands grew sick, and hundreds died. But Washington, he didn't leave for warmer quarters. He walked among his men every single day, begging the government for supplies and consciously choosing to suffer right alongside his soldiers. Surviving that winter is really what forged an unbreakable, unified army.
This leads us right into Section 4, the power of walking away.
Let's fast forward to 1781 and see how all this builds. That crazy strategy of patient survival, it finally worked. With the crucial help of French soldiers and ships, the British army was surrounded at Yorktown, which led to their surrender. Washington had done the impossible. He had won the war. And what he did next was absolutely revolutionary. He won the war, returned his military commission, and just went home to his farm. In almost every other country in history, a victorious military commander with the full backing of a devoted army would seize absolute power. His men literally wanted him to be king. But in December 1783, he voluntarily handed his power back to the Congress and went home to Mount Vernon. It was incredibly simple, but completely revolutionary.
This shocking act of choosing duty over personal desire absolutely stunned the globe. I mean, even his enemy, King George III of England, was in total awe. The king actually noted that if Washington truly gave up his power, he was the greatest man in the world.
But his quiet life at home wouldn't last forever. The country needed a leader again. In 1789, he reluctantly returned to public life to be elected the first president of the United States. He helped build the very foundations of the government, served exactly 2 terms, and then, once again, did what he did best. He refused a 3rd term, walking away from absolute power and setting a tradition that would last for over 150 years.
Section 5, the honest, imperfect truth.
To look at the complete picture of Washington, it is necessary to look at the painful realities of the time. The historical record shows that at the time of his death, more than 300 enslaved individuals lived and worked on his land. Washington privately struggled with this reality. In his final will, he made a decision that was unusual for a man of his immense wealth and era. He legally ordered that the enslaved people he personally owned were to be freed after his wife Martha's death. History views this as an incomplete step, but an unusual one for his time that many of his peers did not take. And this brings us back to a really vital point. Honest stories are the ones that truly teach us. Understanding that Washington had limits and failures doesn't erase the magnitude of his achievements. Instead, it grounds him in reality. It transforms him from an untouchable mythical god into a real, flawed human being. And recognizing those human flaws makes his story a genuine reflection of reality, which is far more educational and relatable for all of us. And finally, our conclusion. The final takeaway. George Washington died quietly and calmly from a throat infection in 1799 at the age of 67. The world mourned the loss of the man who led a starving army through impossible winters and refused a crown. But his ultimate legacy isn't just the country he helped found. His legacy is the profound proof that ordinary, uncertain, and imperfect people can endure incredibly hard roads if they just keep showing up. So how will you apply Washington's quiet courage to your own learning journey? Because whether you're learning a difficult new language, mastering a tough skill at work, or just navigating a dark chapter in life, some days you will feel like you're standing barefoot in the snow. But if you keep going, if you embrace patience and resilience, you are channeling that exact same quiet courage. Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable story with me today on The Explainer. Keep pushing forward, and I'll catch you in our next one.